Shabbat Shalom. I have to admit that I never thought I would begin a sermon with the following sentence. Does anybody know how to say whipped cream in Hebrew? Katsefet. Okay. Katsefet is correct. 2 points for Vered. Katsefet is correct. Some of you may have eaten in Israel at a chain of ice cream stores called katsefet. Katsefet is a nice word. Do you know why the word for katsefet, the word for whipped cream is katsefet? Because the root of katsefet, kuf tsadi pei, actually is related to the notion of anger, to be all frothing at the mouth. So cream that's been frothed and agitated and whipped up is a dessert. But a human being in a state of katsefet is not something pretty to look at. It's not a good look when we're angry. You ever wonder what you really look like when you're mad? I think it would be very hard for us to be exposed to video footage of us in our angriest modes. It's not a good look as an individual. It's also not a good look as a people. I want to go back a few days in the calendar to Wednesday, which we observed and celebrated as Yom Yerushalayim, Jerusalem Day. A day that commemorates the incredible moment in 1967 when, against tremendous military and logistical odds, the paratroopers and other Israeli soldiers entered Jerusalem, conquered it, reunified it, and once again opened up all of Jerusalem as a place where Jews could come and live and pray and be. When I think about what Yom Yerushalayim was and is, I have some mixed feelings. Because I believe that that day and how it is commemorated celebrates the best of us, but at times, for some of us, it brings out the worst. The history is clear and triumphant. I have no nostalgia for Israel pre-1967, not that I was alive to experience it. I have no romanticizing the experience of the Israeli and the experience of the Jew when Jordan was in control of Jerusalem and we had no access to our holiest sites. My mother spent a year in Israel in the early 1960s, and her experience of that year is entirely different than my experience when I was there for my year after high school. I don't fetishize, nor should anyone fetishize, the lack of Jewish access to our holiest sites, which had been the norm for much of the previous centuries. And I celebrate that under Israeli control, all of the religious sites of all religions are safeguarded and given access. And yes, as with any military conquest, there was displacement in that war, including the neighborhood that had been right there, that is now what we think of as the Kotel Plaza. War is complicated and messy and has casualties that are part of the plan and not part of the plan. But I celebrate Yom Yerushalayim, and I recite Hallel at Minyan with a bracha as a moment of religious significance. And I think of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav as the anthem of our people, in some ways more significant than the words of the Hatikvah. And it also happens to be the case, to my chagrin, that aspects of how Yom Yerushalayim is celebrated in Jerusalem has been commandeered by some of the fringiest elements of Jewish peoplehood and Zionist identity. It's hard to know what's the chicken and the egg. Have the fringe elements rushed in, making it harder for moderate expressions of Zionism to feel connected to that day? Or have some of the moderate expressions of Zionism pulled back over the decades out of a certain discomfort with the outcome of the Six-Day War, creating the space in the vacuum into which the fringe elements can pour. But some of what you witness when you're there or on the media, and certainly the way the American media chooses to portray it, on Yom Yerushalayim is ugly. It is ketzef, not katzefet. It's fury, not sweet whipped cream. There are aspects of the march that goes through parts of the Arab quarter to get to Jerusalem, the old city, kind of the way the paratroopers went about it, that you could experience quite joyfully. It's just singing. It's just a notion that says that this pathway should also be available to a Jew in Jerusalem. But there are aspects of it that are menacing and threatening to Arab Palestinian shop owners who simply happen to line the path. And when you've witnessed it, and I have in person, and when you witness it the way the media portrays it, it doesn't look good for our people. And I wonder if those who are involved in it, so many of them who are youth and are being, I think, painfully indoctrinated into the idea that this too is part of what it means to be a proud Zionist, I wonder if they know what they look like when they are amidst their froth. And I wonder if they care. They should. Because there should be passion in our lives and in our Judaism and in our Zionism, but there should be no ketzef. It's really hard to hold oneself to that standard when you are in the midst of a moment, amidst the frenzy. But it's so important. And how do I know it's so important? For many reasons, including a really fascinating verse in Parshat Bamidbar. At the end of the first chapter of Bamidbar, after we've counted all of the tribes and the census is done, we learn about some place where the Levi'im, all the descendants of the tribe of Levi, position themselves around this encampment. The Levi'im would encamp around the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And there should be no ketzef. This is not a reference to biblical whipped cream. There should be no anger and fury al adat b'nei Yisrael, on the congregation of the people of Israel. Vishamru halvi'im, the Levites will protect at mismeret mishkan haidut, protect the inner sanctum. It's a really interesting verse. Most people agree that the pshat, the simple reading of the verse, is that the Levites are there who are educated about what actually happens in the inner sanctum, the Mishkan, to keep the regulars out. We non-Levi'im have no direct access all the time to the Mishkan, at least in the biblical hierarchy. And we already heard from the story of Nadav and Avihu that even when certain Levi'im and Kohanim get too close to the center of spirituality, awful things can happen. So the pshat seems to be, keep the Levi'im like a ring, like a circle around them, to keep people from the outside coming closer and getting punished. And there'll be no ketzef, meaning there'll be no ketzef upon God to the standard Israelite who wanted to get in too close. But there's a fascinating midrashim which reads this in a much more interesting way. The Levi'im, the Levites, represent the structure that keep the Israelites from getting too far in their religiosity, too far in their passion, too far in their own extremism, which all of us have the capability to express, and we're guarding it all the time. Keeping them too far in, or keeping them from getting too far in and too close that they lose perspective. This midrash has the Levim as a priestly class, assigned to guard the inner sanctum, and to guard us from being too drunk on our feelings towards that inner sanctum, any inner sanctum. Whether the inner sanctum is the Mishkan, or the land of Israel, or even the city of Jerusalem. It's as if the Levi'im are a spiritual police, so that our living of Torah and of Judaism, and I would add of Zionism in the modern era, is loving, not menacing, is contained and restrained, and not frothy and frenzied. Our connection to religion, to Torah, to God, and to Israel, it can and it should be suffused with beauty. But it can, if we're not careful, be tinged with fury. And even when fury is well earned, such as the Jewish fury we may have experienced during this year, what does it look like when we express it? What do we look like when we froth at the mouth? The famous statement of Hillel that says, if I'm only for myself, who am I? And if I'm not for others, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? A better translation of that second line, which is not how we normally sing it, is because the word kshe in Hebrew is when. When I'm out there as myself, defending myself, being myself, expressing myself, ma'ani, what do I look like to others? When I'm in my most Jewish moments, my most Zionist moments, my most Jerusalem-loving moments, what do I look like to others? So many of our prayers, as you know, are focused on shalom of peace, sim shalom, oseh shalom. There are some lesser-known versions of prayers that drive home who and how we are supposed to be when we show up as Jews in Jewish spaces. There's a prayer for peace that did not make it into standard liturgy, written by Rabbi Natan Sternhartz in the early 19th century Ukraine, that he wanted to be read in his community every time they gathered for prayer. He wrote, Rak yakiru v'yedu, let everyone know, kol yoshvei tevel, let everyone in the world know who's watching us, ha'amet amito, the truest truth, asher lo banu lazeh olam, we did not come into this world b'shvil riv, in order to fight, u'machloket, and for argument, v'lo b'shvil sina, we didn't come to this place, and God did not give us this place for hatred, v'kina, and jealousy, u'shvichut damin, and God forbid, we didn't come in order to shed blood. Rak banu leolam, we came to this world kedei lahakirotcha, to know you, God. We come into this space to know you, God. Tiparech netzach, may you be blessed forever. And a similar prayer, which appears in different versions of the Machzor in the conservative movement, as a private meditation, which is always done quietly in between the 13 attributes, Adonai, Adonai, Arachum Bechanun, and before Va'ani Tefilati. Next time you're in Shul on Yantif, like this week, or on the high holidays, there's a private meditation, the different versions of it. And one of them says, V'yesh shalom gadol be'emet, may there be grand peace, ben kol adam b'chavero, between every person and his or her fellow, uvein ish le'ishto, and between husband and wife. V'lo tiyeh shum machloket, there should be no argument, afilu belev, even deep in the heart, ben kol b'nei mishpachti, amongst all the members of my family. I meditate on that, and I'm so thankful for that liturgy every time I approach it, because how quickly we can allow the frenzy and the fury, even in our family, to obscure the things that matter the most. Our liturgy reminds us to stay away from ketzef in our interactions with one another, and certainly in our interactions with those around us. And the fact that the liturgy is so replete with it is a reminder of how hard this is to achieve in our homes, let alone in our engagements with the hard, harsh world. A world that far too often communicates that we're not welcome and we're not safe. But even then, how do we direct our forces and our intentions towards passion, but not zealotry? Pride, but not anger. Towards our defense, always, but also always, somehow towards peace. As Chloe already taught us on some level, why do we have this census in Parshat Bamidbar? It's to create and account for an army. A people, particularly one with enemies, needs an army. But this verse reminds us that this census is about two armies. An army of soldiers who are counted, who are there to stand between us and those who wish to defeat us, and to protect us with no apologies. But also the Levi'im, those associated with Aaron, who is known as Ohev Shalom, Rodev Shalom, lover of peace and a pursuer of peace, who stood between us and our basest urges and our ugliest expressions of our individual and tribal selves. They stood and positioned themselves so that we could stand and share our light with the world. That balance has to persist in internal spiritual work and in geopolitical work. The armies of physical weapons, thank God for that. And the armies who give spiritual armor, I'm grateful to them, and we should be amongst their soldiers, working in concert so we can stand together and with all who want to be with us on this path. And as the Torah says, v'lo yeh ketzef, let there be no wrath, even and especially when we're inclined to express it. No wrath in this room, no wrath in this community, not in our homes, not between us and those who may surround us. If and when it is up to us, lo yeh ketzef, let there be no wrath. Shabbat shalom.